8:40 here, so I believe we're just hours away from Joe Biden announcing that he's going to drop out of this race. I think it's going to happen Friday. That's my bet. So today, he could not get more lukewarm support from two of the most powerful people in the Democratic Party. All right, Nancy Pelosi keeps saying Joe Biden has a decision to make. And this is after Joe Biden has repeatedly announced over the past 10 days he's not quitting, he's not dropping out. Okay, what kind of decision does Joe Biden have to make? All right, if he's repeatedly telling us that he's not dropping out. Obviously, Nancy Pelosi believes that he needs to drop out. Chuck Schumer, right, the strongest support that he will utter publicly for Joe Biden is "I'm with Joe." Privately, everyone knows that he wants Joe Biden to drop out. Privately, Barack Obama wants Joe Biden to drop out. And when David Axelrod speaks publicly, and David Axelrod has repeatedly called for Joe Biden to drop out, right, he's doing that with the permission and the guidance and the say-so of former President Barack Obama. Now, George Clooney has written an eloquent op-ed saying that Joe Biden needs to drop out. So Joe Biden might be the first sitting president who agrees not to run for re-election and drops out when he's got 99% of the delegates because of something that a Hollywood actor says. So another delicious angle to this Democratic meltdown is the Congressional Black Caucus, which is 100% behind Joe Biden because their voters are the least engaged, right, least informed, versus Hollywood voters, versus Jews, who are frequently part of America's elite, who are the major funders of the Democratic Party, who dominate the field of Hollywood, have disproportionate influence throughout America, and they are highly informed, right, highly successful, affluent, elite, who, because they're informed, because they know what Joe Biden is doing, right, most desperately want him to drop out. Let's get a quick burst here from Laura Ingraham.
Two former speakers of the House are here to unpack all these wild times. My angle and moments, but first.
We're riding with Biden.
Did anyone mention Paris?
We are riding with Biden.
Was there conversation about Vice President
We are
Kamala?
riding with Biden.
As I've said before, I'm with Joe. I'm with Joe. I'm with Joe.
The matter is closed.
The matter's closed. Not so fast. Tonight, the question of whether Joe Biden is the
Right. So yesterday you had all these news stories that it's over. Joe Biden is going to take the Democrat nomination. He's successfully stared down his challenges. All right. It's definitely going to be Joe. Well, no. I think the withdrawal is going to happen Friday.
Democrat nominee for president of the United States is very much open, AOC. Axios just dropped a bombshell that behind closed doors, Chuck, I'm with Joe Schumer, is signaling to donors that he's open to a ticket that is not led by President Biden. Over the last 12 days, he's been listening to donors' ideas and suggestions about the best way forward for the party, according to three people familiar with the matter. That is not closed. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi is also on the same bandwagon.
Does he have your support to be the head of the Democratic ticket?
As long as the president it's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short. People want him to make that decision, not me.
He has said he has made the decision. He has said firmly this week he is going to run. Do you want him to run?
I want him to do whatever he decides to do, and that's the way it is.
Oh, Nancy's off. And Clyburn heard the message loud and clear. He went from riding with Biden to maybe I'll drive by myself.
Is his decision final?
I don't have any. I have no idea. You have to ask him. I don't know.
Now, it got so bad today that one reporter compared Tim Kaine's comments to a scene from Godfather Part 2.
You were always interested in politics, history. You were around the old-timers who dreamed of how the family should be organized.
The Corleone family was like the Roman Empire.
It was once. Don't worry about anything, Frankie Fabregas.
Thanks.
Don't worry about anything.
Thanks.
That's right.
I have complete confidence that Joe Biden will do the patriotic thing for the country, and he's going to make that decision. He's never disappointed me.
Right. The patriotic thing for the country is to drop out.
He's always put patriotism and the country ahead of himself, and I'm going to respect the decision.
Right. How often have we heard about how Donald Trump is a threat to the republic? How often have we heard about Donald Trump is a narcissist? How often have we heard about Donald Trump is a threat? How often have we heard that Donald Trump makes everyone associated with him look terrible? Right? How often have we heard about Donald Trump's character defects? Right? Donald Trump has narcissistic personality disorder, right? Donald Trump has this and that personality disorder. Well, Mark Leibovich writes for The Atlantic, come on, man, does Joe Biden really understand the stakes? Never underestimate the destructive power of a stubborn old narcissist with something to prove. Ideally, no one gets hurt along the way. But President Joe Biden, 81, is acting like one of history's most negligent and pig-headed leaders at a crucial moment right now, and the rest of us are all pedestrians, right? Our national security is threatened because Joe Biden is clearly not up to the job. I mean, our national security, forgive me, is far more important than whether or not Joe Biden wins Wisconsin.
This opinion piece was written by Alexandra Petrie. Don't worry about the plane landing. The pilot will give it his all. If you stay in, and Trump is elected, and everything you're warning about comes to pass, how will you feel in January? George Stephanopoulos. I'll feel as long as I gave it my all, and I did as good a job as I know I can do. That's what this is about.
And he didn't say as good a job. He said, as long as I do a goodest job.
President Biden. You are in a plane. The pilot comes on the PA system. Well, folks, we're going to be starting our descent, he announces, and should be touching down safely in Denver in about 20 minutes. But if we don't, I'll feel, as long as I gave it my all, and I did as good a job as I know I can do. That's what this is about. You are going into surgery. Your doctor's hands seem a little shaky. Are you sure there is nobody else who can perform this surgery? You ask. There is only one of me. Are you sure that you can operate on me in a way that means I will make it out of this alive? Listen, the doctor says, as the nurse injects your anesthesia. As long as I gave it my all, and I did as good a job as I know I can do, that's what this is about. Maybe for you, you start to say. But not for me. I have to live with the results. You are dangling off a high ledge. Jump, yells a voice. I've got you. Do you? You ask. It seems pretty far and you don't seem like you have the right equipment. Well, the voice says, I will certainly be giving it my all. Your babysitter arrives. I'm here to watch your toddler, she announces. Great, you say. And you know how to do CPR? Well, she says, I will certainly try my best, and in the end, isn't that what counts? You have an apple balanced on your head. And you're sure you can hit it? You yell at William Tell. He shrugs. Well, the important thing, though, is that I give it my all.
So in real life, people don't care much about your motives, with rare exceptions, right? People care about, can you get the job done, or can you not get the job done? Right? That's what it comes down to, and who's going to have confidence that that Joe Biden can get the job done, right? Since his debate, which is nearly 2 weeks ago, much of America has been locked into the classic will he or won't he cliffhanger. Well, much of America that has IQs over 120, right? Most of America does not have an IQ over 120, all right? Most Americans are not highly into politics. We're talking about 5% of America and less has been locked into will he or won't we. So everyone watching this stream follows politics avidly. At least 95% of Americans do not. So will Joe Biden step aside and not run for re-election, as massive majorities of voters have for years said they want him to do? All right, this is a case of the elites catching up to the grassroots. But will he persist in pursuing one of the most ill-fated and ill-advised presidential campaigns ever carried out? No party that is as divided and as dispirited as the Democrats are right now has ever won the presidential campaign. That's never happened before. And so for those Americans who want to vote for someone besides Trump, just imagine being stuck riding with Biden into election day. All right, so donors have ceased giving to the Democratic Party. All right, donations have just absolutely crashed. You'd think there's a deal to be made because both Joe Biden and Hunter Biden are going to need income in a few months. So you'd think that affluent donors could make some kind of deal with the Bidens that they will step away. A big problem here is that Joe Biden is not capable of making this decision, right? He's not cognitively capable of making the decision to step down, right? He is so frozen. He is so stiff, right? That stiff gait that you see in all the videos of Joe Biden, right? People who walk like that also think like that. Your body, how you use your body, how you walk, how you talk, how you carry yourself, how you speak, right? these are all reflections of what's going on with your thinking and with your emotions. Right? Joe Biden is so stiff. He is so locked up. He is so imprisoned by his unnecessary muscular tension patterns that he's not even capable of making the decision whether or not he should drop out. So if things align in the best interests of Joe Biden, then his wife, Jill, right, who's, of course, unelected, has no political experience, right, but she's going to be the one who'll have to make the choice because Joe Biden is so stiff and locked in that he cannot even make the choice to drop out or not. I mean, that's how bad the situation is. And to think that the news media have essentially said for 4 years that this isn't a big deal.
You see more clearly with your glasses on your forehead, by the way. And perhaps the most unmistakable sign that the Biden dam is cracking came from their Hollywood pal and mega fundraiser, George Clooney. Now, just a few weeks ago, you'll recall, he co-hosted a huge Beverly Hills blowout for Biden, but then someone convinced him to launch a...
Right, and there was all this media, all right, so Joe Biden had to be led off stage by Barack Obama. So at this fundraiser, and then there's all this media saying that these were deep fake, cheap videos, right? So we have Barack Obama. Do you think Barack Obama just did this spontaneously, or was he planning to do this to make Trump look bad? Let's go to the videotape. Right, there's Obama. And he's going to be leading Joe Biden off the stage. Right, takes him by the arm. I mean, Joe Biden looks so out of it. I mean, Joe Biden just appears to completely freeze up. Right, and then how did the news media react when conservatives pointed out that Joe Biden froze up on stage, had to be led off by Barack Obama, that this was unfair, these were deep fakes, right? Biden's gaze seems to become fixed on the crowd for a full 10 seconds. He's absolutely lost. He's fixed. Right? You see how fixed he is in his body. Right? You see how fixed he is in his thinking. That vacant stare, he's exhibited that since 2018. And the media said that the conservatives didn't know what they were talking about when they pointed out this obvious problem with Joe Biden. Right, for 6 years, conservatives in the media pointed out that Joe Biden is senile.
Surface-to-air missile in the New York Times, writing that our party leaders need to stop telling us that 51 million people didn't see what we just saw. We're all so terrified of the prospect of a second Trump term that we've opted to ignore every warning sign. The George Stephanopoulos interview only reinforced what we saw the week before. As Democrats, we collectively hold our breath or turn down the volume whenever we see the president, whom we respect, walk off Air Force One or walk back to a mic to answer an unscripted question. Now, of course, Clooney, he's no profile in courage here. His timing is totally political, but it's still quite effective. We're not going to win in November with this president. On top of that, we won't win the House, and we're going to lose the Senate. This isn't only my opinion. This is the opinion of every senator and Congress member and governor with whom I'm spoken in private. Every single one, irrespective of what he or she is saying publicly. Apparently, everyone takes his call. Now, if Biden stays in, Clooney just helped write a devastating campaign ad for Republicans. More on that and the down-ballot panic from the Democrats.
And the killer thing is that Donald Trump was headed for a landslide before the debate. There's a big article by Tim Alberta in the Atlantic on that. But why is it that it's consistently the Democrats rather than the Republicans who get stuck with senile candidates, right? The party of diversity, right, seems to always end up with some old white person in charge for way too long. So California's experiment with diversity led to a historic phase in which California's most powerful Democrats were elderly white people. This is Steve Saylor writing and citing Alexander Burns' 2014 article in Politico. For decades now, right, Democrats who run California have been 70 or 80-somethings from the Bay Area who've dominated government for a generation. Right, rising stars have come and gone, but California at that time, 2014, had a 76-year-old governor running for re-election to a post he first won in 1974. His father first won election in 1958. The two senators at the time were Barbara Boxer, 73, Dianne Feinstein, 81. They've held on to their jobs at that point for 25 years. 74-year-old House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, right, has been in politics for 40 years. The current party chair in California, writing in 2014, was 81-year-old John Burton. Right, so Dianne Feinstein ignominiously held onto her seat until her death in 2023 at age 90. Right, Nancy Pelosi still retains her House seat at age 84. Right, John Burton served as chair of the California Democratic Party until 2017 when he was 84. So why did these old white Democrats cling on to power so long? Right, they're trying to convince themselves that the new diverse Democrats of California were just not quite ready for prime time. And were they wrong? They weren't wrong, right? The most celebrated star of the next generation in California, Kamala Harris, was rocketed into the vice presidency, where she's been an unpopular dud. Gavin Newsom, he'll turn 57 before the election, so if he has to wait 8 years to run for president, he'll be 65, right? So he'll be like the 65-year-old Mitt Romney in 2012. So the party of diversity has found itself ambushed repeatedly by reality that its new up-and-coming diverse stars are simply not up to the job. And as for Joe Biden, as Mark Leibovich says in The Atlantic, he seems fully indifferent to any consideration beyond his own withered pride and raging ego. Right, where he says, oh, as long as I give it my best. And Biden's committed to riding this out and staying the course, no matter how unfit he is, no matter how senile he is, because just like I'm thinking about this one driver who drove into a farmer's market in Santa Monica about 20 years ago. It was like some doddering old, 80-plus-year-old driver who was just kind of frozen in place and just kept plowing ahead, running people over and killing them. Right? When you get so locked into your self-destructive patterns, right, it may no longer be in your power to get out of them. So probably next few days will be serious. Right? The White House has no serious answers for people's doubts about the president's capacity to serve. Right? Biden's longtime rejoinder is "watch me," and incredibly disingenuous given how rarely he gives press conferences. I think this will just be his fourth tomorrow. And few elected Democrats have called publicly for Biden to step aside because they are so lacking in courage. Right? They want to tell us that democracy itself is on the ballot. We may never have another election if Donald Trump wins, but I'm not going to do anything to risk my status and position.
Later on in the show. Now, the Democrats are headed for a cliff. But the bigger question for the voters tonight is, how did we ever get into this mess? Well, there were a lot of collaborators in this cover-up.
Right. We've now got the House of Representatives subpoenaing 3 of Joe Biden's aides about this cover-up. Right. We've had a senile president for 3.5 years. The Democratic Party played along with this, and they rigged the game, right? They rigged the 2016 primary so that Hillary Clinton would win. If the election had been fought fairly, the 80-year-old or that old guy Bernie Sanders would have won. Then they rigged it again in 2020 so that Joe Biden won. Then they rigged it again in 2024 so Joe Biden got re-election. And this is the party that's telling us that democracy is on the ballot when they keep rigging their primary campaigns.
Some of them are inching forward now, but none of these people have any guts. The truth is, they were all willing to accept Biden's condition, keep it all a secret, until he began to hurt them politically. Joining me now, Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Mr. Speaker, great to see you again on The Angle. Now, we're going to get to the issue of the illegal aliens potentially voting in this next election in a minute. But I want you to react to your predecessor, Nancy Pelosi's comments this morning.
She let him deal with this NATO conference. This is a very big deal. Over 30 heads of state are here. And I've said to everyone, let's just hold off. Whatever you're thinking, either tell somebody privately, but you don't have to put that out on the table until we see how we go this week.
What does that tell you about her confidence in Biden? So let's see Biden stumble along with the other leaders who know that he's declining and then do everything next week, or what?
It's been an incredible thing to watch on Capitol Hill. The Democrats are in total disarray. They don't know what to do. They don't have a plan B, but they know they got a serious problem. And as was noted a moment ago, you're right. It's the biggest political cover-up that we've had.
Okay, great article in The Atlantic by Tim Alberta. And he talks about conversations with the 2 very professional, very skilled people running Donald Trump's 2024 campaign. And he was talking to them a few weeks before the debate, right? And they were telling him the outcome of this presidential campaign is a fait accompli. Donald Trump is well on his way to a 320 electoral vote win, right? This is pre-debate. So they were so sure that from all their own internal polls, from their own success running the campaign, that they were going to cast Donald Trump as the dauntless and forceful alpha. Joe Biden would be painted as the pitiable old heel, less a bad guy than the butt of a very bad joke, right? And America's lethargic Uncle Joe needed to be put to bed. And they found out that the public responded to the two candidates precisely as they hoped, right? The percentage of voters who felt that Joe Biden at age 81 was too old for another term just kept rising throughout 2023, right? They were running a very successful campaign, right? And then the debate came along, and it's kind of disturbing because it might upend all their plans, because they very much want to run against Joe Biden. They think that he is the most easily defeated of all the other possible candidates.
Waters prime time tonight.
It's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short.
Is Pelosi about to stab Biden in the back? John Fetterman joins primetime.
Ooh, don't do it.
Clooney was exactly right, and every single person I talked to at the fundraiser thought the same thing, except for the people working for Joe Biden.
Obama directing George Clooney to abandon Joe.
He picked Kamala Harris as his vice president. If Joe had picked someone even halfway competent, they would have bounced him from office years ago.
Trump turns his focus to Laughin' Kamala.
Laughin' Kamala, Laffin apostrophe.
Plus,
because I smell fried bologna all over.
So the New York Times criticizes Donald Trump for being cruel in his speech, but sometimes you have to be kind to be cruel, right? If leaders of the Democratic Party had been more direct, more blunt, and more cruel, then Joe Biden may not have gotten into this disaster by running for a second term. And I heard various media commentators who are part of the conventional mainstream news media talk about how uncomfortable it is to evaluate someone on age, such as Joe Biden, right? It's a highly sensitive issue. But to me, the pursuit of truth is not uncomfortable, right? For the conventional mainstream news media, the pursuit of truth of Joe Biden's obvious senility was something that just made them highly uncomfortable. And I don't see it. When we're talking about public office, where we're talking about the most powerful position in the country, I don't see how that's highly uncomfortable if you're going to criticize that. To me, not telling the truth about these things is highly uncomfortable, right? Brian Stelter, right, conventional, mainstream, liberal media critic, longtime New York Times reporter, columnist, worked at CNN for years, and he makes the argument, well, it's just very uncomfortable to probe Joe Biden's cognitive decline, and so the news media simply, they just did the best they could. And that's the particular hero system of liberals, that there is this very strong moral category of ableism and ageism that we have to be very uncomfortable about crossing.
In Washington, the first shots fired in the Democrats' civil war. It was Nancy Pelosi who pulled the trigger on Biden's favorite morning show.
It's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short. I think overwhelming support of the caucus. It's not for me to say. I'm not the head of the caucus anymore. But he's beloved. He is respected, and people want him to make that decision.
Biden decided he's running, and Nancy Pelosi said he hasn't decided yet. But time's running out. One senior Democrat aide said she knows he's watching. She's not an idiot. She chose those words carefully. Another one said it was a shot in the arm. Biden thought he had until Saturday before Democrats sent in the SWAT team. But Pelosi, the sharpshooter, taking aim early.
Do you believe that him waiting so long to make this decision is
I'm not going to make any comments in the hallway about the fate of our nation. Okay?
Are you concerned whether or not he can win in November?
I think he can.
Do you think he should run for re-election?
I'm not speaking English to you. I'm not going to be making any statements about any of that right now.
Am I speaking English to you? Wait, that sounds a little bit insensitive. I thought we were more diverse and multicultural than that. I remember the mayor of Los Angeles was speaking at Sinai Temple in Westwood, and he urged all of us to go out and talk to someone who doesn't speak our language. Well, I dated someone who didn't speak English, and I didn't speak Spanish. We did speak the international language of love, but I don't recommend that for everyone. It can be quite frustrating not being able to speak the same language. So the Trump campaign is just incredibly professional and disciplined this time around. And throughout 2023, they've seized on Biden's every stumble, his every blank stare, to reinforce the observation that Joe Biden is stuttering, stammering, walking around, feeling his way like a blind man. Right? That was the plan, and it worked. And then you just watch Joe Biden consistently slide in the polls, and the Trump campaign has been sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars for an advertising blitz that will punctuate Joe Biden's very visible decrepitude. So Trump's team entered the debate June 28th, believing that a landslide awaited them. And only one thing could disrupt that plan, a change of candidates atop the Democratic ticket.
Now in the hallway.
It's one thing for the House to buck Biden, but the Senate, the chamber close to Joe's heart, is starting to crack.
I am deeply concerned about Joe Biden winning this November because it is an existential threat to the country if Donald Trump wins.
This race is on a trajectory that is very worrisome if you care about the future of this country. Donald Trump is on track, I think, to win this election and maybe win it by a landslide and take with him the Senate and the House. For me, this isn't a question about polling. It's not a question about politics. It's a moral question about the future of our country.
And just breaking tonight, the first Democrat member of the Senate is calling on Biden to withdraw from the race, Senator Peter Welch of Vermont. And Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is telling donors he's open to dumping Biden. So Nancy and Chuck have formed an alliance. And Biden's countering. How? By sending his staff to Capitol Hill tomorrow to beg. But an anonymous Democrat senator calls it a waste of everyone's time if Biden can't even come make the case himself. Biden's done negotiating. CNN reports that Biden is done talking about it, and he's staying in the race. But this is a delicate hostage negotiation, and if Biden thinks only God can convince him to bow out, he should prepare for this.
If he doesn't drop out in the next week or two, a whistleblower will emerge, somebody who has some fortitude, some ethics, some morals inside of Joe Biden's cabinet, somebody inside of that White House who knows what's going on, who understands the cover-up, and they will leak something to you for your primetime show.
Biden's about to realize that the presidency isn't the most powerful thing in Washington.
All right, back to this great article in The Atlantic by Tim Alberta. So he notes in political circles, it's considered a marvel that Donald Trump managed to win the presidency once and came within 43,000 votes of winning it a second time without ever assembling a professional operation. But the people who now run his campaign said that if Trump had simply run a slightly more effective campaign in 2020, right, a campaign that didn't go broke in the fall, right, a campaign that didn't employ unskilled interlopers in crucial positions, right, a campaign that did not discourage his supporters from casting votes by mail, he would have won a second term comfortably. So he's got two people, Susie Wiles and LaSavita, who are incredibly professional, and they're just running a great campaign, Chris LaSavita and Susie Wiles. And they've gotten Trump to come around on mail-in voting. They getting through to Trump that low information voters are more likely to vote for Donald Trump this time around than the Democrat candidate. Throughout American history, as long as we've been measuring this, right, low information voters, if they voted, were more likely to vote for the Democrats. Now, with Trump, that has completely turned around. So the easier you make voting now for the first time, that consistently works in favor of Donald Trump and the Republicans. So they've turned Donald Trump around. It wasn't easy, but they turned him around on the importance of mail-in balloting. They've had to give in to Trump's demand for all sorts of lawyers and a team monitoring election integrity, even though there's no reason to believe that there were significant failures in that regard in 2020. So they've had to give in to Trump's request on that score. So they're going to waste money accommodating Trump's delusions about voter fraud costing him the 2020 election. Because Donald Trump can't face the honest truth that he lost the 2020 election because of his seemingly incompetent COVID response and then his incompetent political campaign. Instead, he wants to blame it on voter fraud. And so because he can't face the truth, right, he's going to waste resources this time round combating a non-existent threat, voter fraud. But in most things, right, Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita have turned him around. And you've got a campaign that is unlike anything that Donald Trump has had before. And they are prepared for all the different candidates who could replace Joe Biden's, all right? Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita, two of America's most feared political operatives. And they really seem to know what they're doing. They have taken control of the Republican National Committee, all right? They have taken control of Republican spending for this election. They've got a more nimble campaign. They've completely revamped how Republicans spend their money. And they led Donald Trump to a smashing triumph in the Iowa caucus, even though they spent considerably less money than his rivals like Ron DeSantis. So these two know what they're doing, and Trump is listening to them.
The Democrat machine is. We're witnessing a D-Day level invasion, air, ground, sea. Barack Obama just directed George Clooney to send up the bat signal that Barack really did need to help Joe off the stage at the LA fundraiser.
So,
more on that later.
Susie Wiles runs the day-to-day operation, and Chris LaCivita, a Marine veteran, right? He charts the macro strategy.
Top Chicago donors are already halting fundraising lunches at the convention. But Biden reportedly saying, if major donors don't come along, we'll do it without them.
So their plan, Wiles and LaCivita, has never been about beating Joe Biden at the margins. Their plan has always been to bully him, to humiliate him, and they baited him so much that he lashed out and offered Trump these two debates where he was completely humiliated.
Tough talk, but behind the scenes, Team Biden scrambling tonight, calling up convention delegates to head off a rebellion in Chicago. Delegates were reported.
So the people running Trump's campaign, right, they have recalibrated it to immigration, economics, policing, and cultural positions that have antagonized the working class. Right. So if Trump wins big, Wiles and LaCivita won't only be credited with electing a president, they'll be remembered for running a campaign that has altered America's political DNA. Right. If there is a Trump electoral wipeout, which seems most likely, where you get a Republican for president carrying the popular vote for just the second time in 9 tries, he would obliterate entire down ballot garrisons of the Democratic Party. Right? America would be completely transformed with Republican control of the House and Senate. Right? And this is a scenario that Democrats were scoffing at a few months ago, but not anymore.
Reportedly thunderstruck at the calls. Some of them had to double check the caller ID to make sure it was from Delaware and not a prank call. Biden's delegates see a bloodbath coming.
Right, David Axelrod, who is Barack Obama's strategist, he says, at the moment, we're fighting on to hold on to Virginia and New Hampshire and Minnesota. The main 6 or 7 battlegrounds are gone. We're talking about a landslide for Trump, both in the Electoral College and in the popular vote. The magnitude of that defeat would be devastating to the party. Right, this would sweep Democrats out of office everywhere, House, Senate, governor. And you'd have Donald Trump appointing at least 2 new U.S. Supreme Court justices.
If Biden ends up running, potentially the Democrats could lose the Senate, the House, and the White House. And it's going to be a bloodbath. The blue states that we have held for many decades might potentially turn red.
Right. Tim Alberta says, when I was interviewing these leaders of the Trump campaign, I was struck by their arrogance that animates their approach to an election that most pundits long expected would be a 3rd consecutive cliffhanger.
Democrats are panicking over polling that shows New York is now a battleground state. Sticking with Biden.
I so love this story that I am giving up a great soccer match. Did you see Uruguay bully the United States in soccer about a week ago? And then this past weekend, Uruguay just bullied Brazil, one of the world's great soccer powers. So Uruguay is just a tiny country of about, 3 million in South America, completely landlocked. And I have never seen a more physical soccer match as Uruguay versus Brazil this past weekend. They just beat down Brazil. There were so many fouls called. And now Uruguay is taking on what looks to be the best soccer team in this competition in the Americas, Colombia. But I better have that recorded on my YouTube TV. All right. And what a smashing victory for England over Holland. All right. They've hardly ever played each other in knockout matches. And England, in the 90th minute, gets a goal to defeat the Netherlands 2-1 to go on to a second consecutive final of the European Championships.
Biden has become political suicide. The Clintons are saying the party is sailing into a hurricane.
It reminds me of a book they made me read in college called Ship of Fools. A bunch of desperate people sailing into disaster. And, you know, I just think that cowards have never beat criminals in a war yet. And the way that you beat criminals is not to be cowards, is to take it directly home.
Biden, for the first time in 50 years, has his own party.
I'm wrong. Uruguay is not landlocked, but it is a country of about 3.4 million people.
Rooting against him. And it's not just that. Trump, the media, and the Democrats all want the same thing. Biden gone. The Times says longtime party loyalists are now reduced to hoping for another major public misstep by Biden, such as a serious stumble at his NATO news conference to convince the president that he should leave the race on his own. Democrats are literally praying that Biden falls over another sandbag. In June, Biden tripping would have been the Democrats' biggest nightmare. And now in July, it's their only hope. And his big boy NATO press conference could be the final dance. His first press conference where he won't get the questions ahead of time. But he should know no one's going to ask about NATO. Tomorrow's press conference is going to be so brutal that Dana Perino is advising the White House to cancel it to save Joe's dignity and allow him to leave with some grace. Biden's whole presidency has been focused on how history will remember him. He spent hours with historians in the Oval. He's compared himself to Washington, Lincoln, and FDR. He has Steven Spielberg choreographing his campaign. But history will remember Biden for how he handles this. Not COVID, not the CHIPS Act, how he handles this moment. Is there going to be an extraction team sent into the White House with a straitjacket and a gurney? Or does Biden hold hostages until the convention, where he's going to dare the delegates to vote for someone else? Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman joins me now. Senator, it's a great honor to have you here. Is this a dream of yours to appear on
Okay. So Megyn Kelly really comes out with a good show. I'm impressed by the quality of her show.
But then, Cook Political Report, which has been called the Bible of the political community, came out with a truly dire story on the actual state of this race for Democrats. They look at all the polling so far. They look at prior elections, how they were forecast, how they landed, and they have an absolutely terrible prognosis for the Dems, which we'll get into in a minute. They made major changes to their electoral college rankings and ratings for each candidate, moving 3 toss-up states now to lean Republican, including Nevada. All right, Arizona, Georgia, the other 2. Arizona, Georgia used to be reliably red. They haven't been. So the fact that they were toss-ups was not great. But now they're back to lean Republican. And Nevada now, which had been Harry Reid's state, he had gotten those unionized workers out election and election again. And then the apparatus he built did the same for Democrats to follow, is now lean Republican. And I have to say, I think that might be understanding Nevada. Trump's doing great in Nevada. Biden won those states by narrow margins in 2020. Cook moved Minnesota and New Hampshire from likely Dem to just lean Dem. Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin remain a toss-up, with Cook concluding that Pennsylvania, which is a must-win for President Biden, is now the most vulnerable toward a flip.
So Donald Trump has never gotten over being outmaneuvered by Ted Cruz in the Iowa caucuses in 2016. And so he didn't want it to happen again to run DeSantis. He claimed at the time the 2016 caucuses were rigged. And Wiles and LaCivita sat him down to discuss strategy, and they warned him about what Ron DeSantis was planning. And Trump said, this can never happen again. And at the same time, Trump's legal fees were accounting for 25 cents of every dollar raised by his political campaign. So Trump was not going to be asked to spend money like Ron DeSantis could, but they discovered that he did not need to. So in Florida, Susie Wiles claims she found that there were 1 million Trump supporters who had no history of engaging with the Republican Party. But when they were contacted, they would become Donald Trump's most devoted volunteers. She decided this same thing is possible in Iowa. And so they reached out to people who had no history of participating in Republican politics, but were enthused about Donald Trump. And they found about 8,000 Iowans who were pro-Trump and had never engaged with Republican politics. And they reached out to them. They lined them up. They created captains. They created an organization that was largely volunteer. Right. So these captains came from the third tier of Iowa's electorate. They were identified. They were recruited. They were trained. They were given a list of 10 targets in their community who fit a similar profile and told them to turn them out for Trump. It was called 10 for Trump. So they went to find and mobilize Trump's low propensity, low information supporters to deputize people just like themselves. Trump won 51% of the vote in the Iowa caucuses, despite being heavily outspent. Now, a large part of the reason that Donald Trump has completely turned things around is that the Democrats' lawfare program against him galvanized Republican and conservative support. I think that there's a good case to be made if the Democrats hadn't run lawfare against Donald Trump, that he would not have been the Republican nominee in 2024.
In Donald Trump's favor, Pennsylvania. I don't think there's another state that President Biden has spent more time in either, at least certainly not recently. These are all changes Cook Political says happened because of that debate debacle. They walk you through. It's a fascinating analysis. We're going to go in depth. Then, on the heels of that this morning, Nancy Pelosi goes on the president's favorite TV show, Morning Joe, to deliver this. And I want you to listen.
So Tim Alberta goes to Trump campaign headquarters, and it's a headquarters so small, so austere, right? So low budget that nobody there even realizes it's there. When he tells the security guard at the front desk that he'd come to visit the Trump office, she gives him a quizzical look. Only after hanging around for several hours was I clued into the joke that nobody in the building of the Trump campaign headquarters, none of the dozen law firms or the rare coin dealer or the security guard, has any idea who exactly occupies the second and sixth floors.
Listen when the reporter asks her direct questions. See if she says yes. Okay, they're very simple questions he's asking her. Very simple. See if she just answers them with a yes or
right. So the new Trump campaign is all about efficiency, right? Unlike Trump's 2020 effort, which raised more than $1 billion, but ran out of cash during the home stretch. And the Wiles and La Savita, they control all the money. They control the National Republican Party. They've completely taken it over. They've installed Donald Trump's former daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, as the new co-chair.
or a no, and listen to what she says if she doesn't say yes or no.
But let me ask you about the current moment. Does he have your support to be the head of the Democratic ticket?
As long as the president has, it's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short. I think overwhelming support of the caucus. It's not for me to say. I'm not the head of the caucus anymore. But he's beloved. He is respected, and people want him to make that decision. Not me.
So this new Trump campaign is focusing on two groups: low propensity Republicans and the persuadable swing voter. Right? They're very much narrow casting. They're not going after blacks. They're going after black men aged 18 to 34.
He has said, he has made the decision. He has said firmly this week, he is going to run. Do you want him to run?
I want him to do whatever he decides to do. And that's the way it is. Whatever he decides, we go with. Let him deal with this NATO conference.
Right. So this is who Trump sees as swing voters, right? College-educated women, working-class Latinos, urban black men under 40.
He is the host of it, and that means not just hosting, it means orchestrating the discussion and setting the agenda. And he's doing so magnificently. And I've said to everyone, let's just hold off. Whatever you're thinking, either tell somebody privately, but you don't have to put that out on the table until we see how we go this week. But I'm very proud of the president.
Wow.
So Trump's campaign says there are really four true battlegrounds: Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And they believe that Georgia, Nevada, and North Carolina are moving out of reach for Joe Biden.
It's up to the president to decide if he's going to run.
So they don't really need to run a national campaign. They're running the equivalent of 4 or 5 Senate races.
Time is running short. Again, just 2 days ago, President Biden sent a letter to Nancy Pelosi and all of her fellow Democratic colleagues saying he is firmly committed to staying in this race to the end. He said explicitly the same to George Stephanopoulos. He said the same to the Democratic governors with whom he met last week. Let's see. It's up to the president to decide. And when the anchor says he did decide, he says he's made the decision. He's firmly in it. He's going to run. Do you want?
So the people running Trump's campaign say, if we lose, there's a pretty good chance that we're going to be thrown in jail. So a lot of the people running Trump's campaign are saying this, right? It might sound paranoid, but they believe in a second Biden administration, deep state flunkies will arrest people who essentially oppose Joe Biden.
Want him to? Not a yes in either instance. Does he have your support? She doesn't say yes. Do you want him to run? She doesn't say yes. I want him to do whatever he decides to do.
So, unlike Joe Biden, who's stiff and stuck in his ways, Donald Trump is changing. So, Wiles and LaSavita say that Donald Trump, the man who once loathed making donor calls, is now dialing for dollars at 7 in the morning unprompted. Right? The man who could never be bothered with the fine print of Iowa's caucuses finally sat down and learned the rules and then started explaining them to Iowans at his pre-caucus events. Right? The man who treated 2016 like a reality show and 2020 like a spin-off now speaks of little else but winning. So in 2020, Donald Trump railed against voting by mail. He refused to heed the advice of campaign aides who told him that absentee voters would decide the election. This time around, Susie Wiles led a months-long effort to educate her boss on the advantages of voting by mail. She explains how Republicans in Florida have built a sprawling, successful operation targeting people who prefer not to vote in person. She pressed Trump on the subject over the course of at least a dozen conversations, pled with him to bless the campaign's efforts to organize a voter contact strategy built around absentee ballots. And the funny thing is, she can't even take credit for convincing Donald Trump. It was a person who will remain nameless, someone from outside the campaign who happened to be kibitzing with Donald Trump about his own reasons for voting by mail. And then that person said something that jolted Trump's brain. That's when the switch flipped. You work on something, and then some bizarre, unexpected way, somebody phrases it differently. Somebody he particularly respects in a particular area who says it, and then that's it.
That, my friends, from a very smart and savvy political negotiator, no one can say she isn't, is extremely telling. This is important, and it's probably the beginning of the end. Joining me now is Glenn Greenwald. He's host of Rumble's System Update and a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist.
As you say, Nancy Pelosi is very savvy. She's 84 years old, but unlike Biden, she actually is still quite perceptive and very cunning. She sees what everybody sees, which is that basically Joe Biden has, I don't want to say no chance.
So for 2 decades, Republicans have ignored low information, low propensity, left-leaning voters, particularly young men of color, who, if they vote, typically vote Democrat. These are swing voters now in Trump's campaign's perspective.
Because you never know, but very little chance to win against Donald Trump. And that not only that, it doesn't appear that he will just lose, but that he will lose in such a way and turn off so many voters that.
So since Joe Biden was elected in 2020, right, there's all sorts of evidence that Black and Hispanic men are drifting right. And so Republicans think they can siphon off a significant chunk of these voters. This could make November a realignment election, much like Obama's win in 2008. That shifts perceptions of voter coalition, sends the losing side scrambling to recalibrate its approach.
That it will jeopardize the thing really Nancy Pelosi cares about most, which is even the majority in the House and most definitely the majority in the Senate. And so
Susie Wiles says it's so targeted, we're not fighting for Black people, we're fighting for Black men between 18 and 34.
They don't care if Joe Biden is capable of serving as president. If he were ahead and even more senile than he is, they would be fully behind him. What they're concerned about is they all believe that he can't win in November and that he will take down all Democrats with him.
So for every Karen we lose, Trump aides used to say, we're going to win a Jamal and an Enrique. But Trump's campaign says, I don't think we're going to lose all the Karens either, right? They buy eggs, they buy gas, they know. They carpool, they know. So if Trump converts significant numbers of Black and Hispanic voters and holds on to a sizable portion of suburban white women, we're talking about a blowout in November.
That's on one side. On the other side, though, is that you have a politician, and Joe Biden is nothing but a politician. He's done nothing in his whole life but be a politician in Washington, elected to the Senate at the age of 29 in the early 1970s, who has spent his entire life chasing the presidency. All he ever wanted was to be president. And now that he has this power in his hands and this title in his hands, and now that all the people who are around him and who control him basically have that power in their hands.
So they're also pleading with Trump to not talk about the 2020 election being rigged. So they haven't completely succeeded, but Trump has diminished that talk, which tends to turn off a lot of potential voters.
Two, the idea that Joe Biden and the people who control him are just going to voluntarily relinquish this power simply because of some appeal to the common good is contrary to everything we know about Joe Biden. He's a narcissistic, power-hungry president. And I think that that's the dilemma that Democrats have, is they're trying to gently push him to do what they think he should do. But he's the one who has to give up the power. And the reason why Nancy Pelosi is 84 years old and still on the Hill, the reason why Dianne Feinstein stayed there until she was 91, propped up in a wheelchair, barely able to speak, is because these people cling to power until the very moment that they can't do it any longer.
So one of the maxims of the campaign that they drill into the staff is that self-doubt destroys. You're either right or you're wrong. You can't second-guess decisions once the bullet leaves the chamber, right? Hesitation in combat gets you killed. Don't hesitate. So for all their lofty talk of transforming Donald Trump, it continues to be Donald Trump who does the transforming. That's the conclusion in this excellent Tim Alberta article in The Atlantic.
Mm-hmm. But for her, I mean, you listen to her, and you're right. I mean, we've said all along, it's not an age thing with Biden. It's an ability thing. It's a cognition thing. Look at Alan Dershowitz. I mean, I love Alan, and I listen to his podcast all the time. He's as sharp as they come, and he's 85 years old. He could be president. Joe Biden cannot. It's an individual thing. That's just the truth of it. So if just in case people thought maybe she misspoke, maybe that wasn't calculated, she wanted to take it back. No, her spokesperson just released a statement following the Morning Joe appearance. It reads as follows. Speaker Pelosi fully supports whatever President Biden decides to do. We must turn our attention to why this race is so important. Donald Trump would be a disaster for our country and our democracy. That's no better. That's equally bad. She's not endorsing a President Biden run. She's ignoring the fact that he is telling everyone he has decided he's staying in the race. And she's telling other Democrats, just wait until the end of this week, which is exactly what Joe Manchin said earlier, a couple days ago. Just wait until the end of this week. We started the show yesterday asking, what is the magic about Saturday and Sunday? And we speculated openly, it's polls. They're waiting for more data on just how badly the debate hurt. Not just Biden. They know it hurt him, but them, the House members and the Senate Democrats. And so far what we're getting, Glenn, is it hurt them badly. It hurt all of them very.
Okay, Mark Halperin had a call this afternoon. He's my favorite political
what
reporter.
Happened yesterday on Capitol Hill turned out to be the first act of a Freddy Krueger movie. Freddy Krueger's going back at Joe Biden right now to try to get him to quit. And that's happening in part because I haven't talked to a single Democrat today who doesn't want Joe Biden gone, regardless of what their public position is. They would be relieved. They would trade him for Vice President Harris. Increasingly, they would trade him for an open convention, which we'll talk about. But they're going to be an extreme push. And in part, it's because there's so much unhappiness on Capitol Hill. So many members of Congress who want him gone, even the ones who haven't said so publicly. And in part because the clock is ticking. There's a limited number of days. And Team Biden is being extremely crafty, very tactically brilliant in trying to push this back. We can't talk about it till NATO's over. Now he's doing a Lester Holt press conference tomorrow, Lester Holt interview on Monday. They are trying to run out the clock. But the people who want him gone are mounting a very aggressive effort to get him gone. I got a text today that I'm going to read to you about someone's view of Joe Biden. Never got the respect he deserved from the Clintons and the Obamas. He delivered for the party on major legislative items, in his mind, far greater than Obama did. The voters chose him in the primaries. He's earned this. He stepped in line for every other Democrat nominee. And now it's the party's responsibility to step in line for him. Joe Biden is immovable. I still think it's possible that he will be immovable. There's a number of people who would like him gone who are relying on Nancy Pelosi and one other Democrat, I believe, to see if they can get him gone. Nancy Pelosi does not have to deal with the caucus and the fact that there are people in the caucus publicly for him. She, on Morning Joe, people have focused on her equivocal reply about Joe Biden. I think as important is to look at her praising of Joe Biden and her emphasis that it's his decision. Anyone who thinks they're going to impose a decision on him is wrong, I believe, from what people I've talked to and from knowing Joe Biden. The way to get him out is to lead him to believe that he can't win. There's a lot of polling data out there paid for by donors and politicians just to demonstrate in their minds more emphatically than the public polling that he can't win. But this notion of he can't win, which is the received universal wisdom amongst almost every Democrat, is not something Joe Biden's just going to accept, particularly in July. And so there is an effort underway to say what kind of polling data would make a case you can't win as the way they believe they can get him out. There's some indication now that it's not going to be a Joe Biden decision as much as a Jill Biden decision. I'm looking into the question of something I don't know anything about, which is the Jill Biden-Nancy Pelosi relationship. If anyone on this call can speak to that, please raise your hand when the time comes. That's going to be important. The Clooney op-ed is not a Vandy op-ed by a Hollywood celebrity. He's an extremely smart guy. My indications are that he didn't do that on his own. And it's devastating for President Biden and his efforts to stay in office, although not necessarily dispositive, because of three reasons. Number one, Hollywood money. People in Biden world where Jeffrey Katzenberg is leading the fundraising, very difficult for them to go forward with that Hollywood money. And while Clooney is not all influential in Hollywood, he's damn influential. Number two, Clooney wrote about the fundraiser that he did with the president not that long ago, which famously where Barack Obama led Joe Biden off the stage. And he said that was Atlanta Joe, that was Debate Joe. That has someone who had recent intimate access with President Biden saying, the debate is not a one-night problem. The debate is a systemic problem. And so it explodes that. And finally, Clooney called for an open convention. One of the things that's changed in the last day or two is the assumption that Vice President Harris either couldn't be talked out of wanting the nomination or couldn't be expected to fight for the nomination at the convention, that you would need to be coordinated. That stock has dropped precipitously. There have been people for an open convention from the start, but Clooney put the flag hard in open convention. Again, not an accident. And I think that if Joe Biden does step aside and Vice President Harris wants to be the nominee, increasingly, again, this is a 180 flip for me. Increasingly, I believe it's more likely to be an open convention and not something that's coordinated upon her. The president has gotten endorsements from people in the last couple of days, starting with the Philadelphia politicians over the weekend. And that was significant for creating the impression that he was okay. And it was significant for Jeffries and Schumer not being able to come out in some unified way and call for him to step down from the nomination. He's a little bit vulnerable now. If AOC, we've seen some people backslide, a couple of politicians backslide, previously supportive, now less supportive. If AOC or Bob Casey or Mark Kelly, who this week stood with President Biden, change their mind, going to be a big story, and it may well embolden people to abandon him. The groups haven't abandoned him, right? The labor mayors, etc. But he is going to be vulnerable if people start to switch. A couple more things. Barack Obama may not be seeing his hand publicly, but I have a fun.
Yeah, it's the low information voters, right? Those who aren't clued in, those who aren't very smart, who stand by Joe. It's not usually a great way to run a campaign when your bedrock of support are the least intelligent, least informed.
Funny feeling you're going to start to get indications that his hand is in some of the things that are happening, particularly this question of how to deal with Vice President Harris, with whom he's had a long relationship. That's something worth watching. Press conference tomorrow, Lester Holt on Monday, campaigning in Michigan on Friday. He's supposed to go to the beach on Saturday, Rehoboth. If you're on here and you work for a television network, I recommend talking to your assignment desk about a stakeout early before the president gets there to see if he might have any visitors this weekend. There is a feeling in the Democratic Party amongst the donors, members of Congress, some of the governors, that because of the nature of the clock on this, Nancy Pelosi needs to do something this weekend. She said on Morning Joe, got to wait till after the NATO meeting. So even though I think that sometimes there are kind of artificial deadlines created by the media and by some politicians, I really do believe that by early next week, given the timing of everything, there'll either be a successful effort to convince him for his own good, not for the good of the country, for his own good, he needs to step aside.
Right, and even if he doesn't step aside, he's just one disaster from stepping aside at any point. And even if he wins re-election, it's very likely that he would step aside shortly before his inauguration, shortly after his inauguration. The man is senile. He's clearly not up to the job. He is frozen. He is stiff. He is just staring blankly out of the world. He can barely project his voice. Right? The reason that the voice quality is so bad, the audio quality is so bad on his interview with George Stephanopoulos, is that Joe Biden's voice is so weak, they have to boost the gain all the way up, which then pulls in all sorts of ambient noise.
I'm going to open it up now for questions, comments, suggestions. I'm not watching my Twitter feed very closely, so if news breaks while we're on here, please raise your hand and share.
Has his press conference tomorrow, and how could the outcome of that press conference change the dynamic? Whether he does well, or as I expect he will, he'll do very poorly.
Well, I'm not sure I bet on poorly. He was pretty good at NATO yesterday, and obviously they got to do whatever they need to prepare him. I mean, my general sense is the people right now who want him gone, not counting the voters who want him gone, because unfortunately they don't have much of a say here, just in terms of democracy. But I don't think he can do well enough to satisfy the people who are currently plotting against him. I do think that he could do poorly enough to embolden more people. But I don't think the press conference, unless he's at an extreme, unless he's extremely good or extremely bad, I don't know that it'll matter much. And obviously it depends on the questions. And I remain super interested in what my colleagues do in terms of division.
Look, you can't reverse the aging process, even if he was the most silver-tongued devil tomorrow at his press conference. All right, we know the senility. We know how he's locked in to an incredibly small stride, how awkwardly and painfully he moves. We know that long blank stare, which has been present in his public appearances since 2018. We know the guy is largely mentally checked out. And so he could come together and just give the most brilliant press conference tomorrow, but that's not going to change things in his favor. Right? The only way that things are going to change are against what he wishes to do.
The questions, the tone of the questions, and how many of them are about this? You know, does anybody ask a NATO question or an abortion question or anything else? We'll have to see. But my current spidey sense, not that big a deal. I should mention there's another important thing taking place, which could be more important than the press conference could be, which is Biden aides are meeting with senators and Senate aides on Capitol Hill tomorrow, and it's some indication from one source that House members may be added as well. This is the Biden high command, the most senior people, and they'll come armed with a lot of arguments about why everybody should stick with Biden. But that could end up being quite a contentious session.
Yeah, let's get a little bit more here from Jesse Waters.
It's hard to know what anybody in the media is actually thinking, except me. I'm an open book. But the rest of them, they always have secrets that you'll never know about until they get caught on camera. George Stephanopoulos, who just interviewed the president, spent hours with him, revealed his true thoughts about Biden. TMZ got it on tape. Watch.
What do you think? Do you think Biden should step down? You talked to him more than anybody else have lately, and you can be honest. You don't think he can serve 4 more years? All right, that's an answer.
Isn't it a journalist's job to tell the truth? How long has George been repressing these feelings? George apologized for telling the truth. Quote, earlier today, I responded to a question from a passerby. I shouldn't have. Then ABC News said this. George expressed his own point of view and not the position of ABC News, even though he's like the chief political anchor of the network. Today, we're also finding out NBC's Chuck Todd has had a major scoop on Biden in his pocket for years, but he kept it a secret, of course, until now.
I had a cabinet secretary 2 years ago. Right. Okay. 2 years ago.
all out of the blue asked me, do you really think he's going to, he can't run again like this? And I said, well, you have more interaction with him than I do. And they said, I don't have a lot of interaction with him. This is a pretty senior cabinet secretary. So, and this was 2 years ago. This is one of those, it's the classic open secret. It's a non-versation, right? It's the story everybody knows and everybody was afraid to talk about.
It's probably Mayor Pete. But so why is everybody so afraid to talk about it? Power. A couple weeks ago, they said videos of Biden wandering in Italian fields were cheap fakes. Now they say we knew Biden was shot the whole time. If we said Biden looks frail, they called us conspiracy kooks. Now the media is inviting on doctors to say Joe has Parkinson's.
He has just such classic features of neurodegeneration. I mean, word finding difficulties, and that's not, I couldn't find the word. That's from degeneration of the word retrieval area. You notice when he turns, it's kind of end block turning. It's not a quick turn. So that's one of the hallmarks of Parkinsonism is rigidity and bradykinesia, slow movement. His motor symptoms are degenerating. He has Parkinsonism. That is a fact. He has degeneration of the brain. Show me the MRI. Show me he doesn't.
It's a fact. So why are we hearing about these facts now? Because they think Biden can't beat Trump. They started telling the truth because they know how powerful the truth is. So powerful, it can get them another candidate. Mark my words, whistleblowers are coming. If Biden doesn't drop out soon, they'll detonate his entire campaign. Joe Concha is a Fox News contributor. So these anchors like Stephanopoulos, they're just actors. They're just playing a role. They have totally different opinions.
Clooney kind of, shattered this, but you haven't seen very many people who spend time with Joe Biden acknowledging that Atlanta Joe is a real thing and not a one-night aberration. And I think a lot of members of Congress are going to press these folks because these are folks who spent time lately with Joe Biden.
Right. Atlanta Joe is the Joe in that disastrous debate, June 28th.
And ask them, what's the deal? Explain how he's not going to make another big mistake. Thank you, Ray. Let's go to Chris Simmons, please. Unmute.
I'm concerned, and I want to know if you've heard any good strategies on how to deal with the likely backlash from Black women in particular if they skip over Kamala.
Yeah, great question. So I don't think they can skip over her completely. I think again, I'm just talking based on people I've talked to. I think one option is to see if President Obama can keep her from running. Not impossible, because I think what they're going to show her potentially is the same kind of data they're going to show President Biden, which is data that says you can't win. So you want to be the nominee and you want to be the one to lose to Donald Trump, be my guest. I also think they'll say, hey, go earn it at the convention. Now, the convention delegates are Biden-Harris delegates, and maybe she would. But I think they're going to try to do one of those two things. Either let her win it at the convention or get her out. And that takes the edge off the exact problem you're pointing to. The people who are worried about that, and it's a legitimate worry from just pure politics, the people who are worried about that are trying to find a way to make it unconfrontational. In other words, they're not going to endorse somebody else. They're not going to present some other ticket. They're going to say, Madam Vice President, go for it. Or they're going to say, you shouldn't go for it. And we'll have to see it ends up. But Chris, you're absolutely right. It's definitely a concern for a lot of folks. And that's part of the political problem. But as I said, a few days ago, there was sort of a notion of let's go with the vice president. Most people I'm talking to now, including people who are prominent in Black Democratic politics, are saying crazy to go through the trouble of getting Joe Biden out of the way and turn the nomination over to someone who we don't think has any better chance. And in some cases, we think has a worse chance of winning. Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's go to Mark.
So yeah, there's a downside to using affirmative action, right? There's a significant downside to playing identity politics in that you get stuck with a lot of people who aren't particularly sharp. Now let's get Megyn Kelly here talking with
very badly,
Greenwald.
and that I'll put it in the words of Michael Bennet, who's a senator from Colorado, a Democrat, who was on CNN last night, and listen to how he put it. He was saying Biden is in trouble. Listen,
my colleague Dana Bash reported that you, Senator John Tester, and Senator Sherrod Brown all said during that lunch that you don't think President Biden can win in 2024. Is that true?
Well, it's true that I said that, and I did say that behind closed doors, and you guys and others asked whether I'd said it, and that is what I said. So I figured I should come here and say it publicly.
Why do you think he can't win in November?
I just think this race is on a trajectory that is very worrisome if you care about the future of this country. Joe Biden was 9 points up at this time. The last time he was running, Hillary Clinton was 5 points up. This is the first time in more than 20 years that a Republican president has been up in this part of the campaign. Donald Trump is on track, I think, to win this election and maybe win it by a landslide and take with him the Senate and the House. And we have 4 months to figure out how we're going to save the country from Donald Trump.
And take it with him, the Senate and the House. And that, Glenn, just one other soundbite, dovetails perfectly with what we're seeing in the reporting from pollsters, from people who watch polls for a living, including the senior data reporter at CNN, whose name is Harry Enton, with this report. Watch.
The fact of the matter is, you look at the national polling, the generic congressional ballot choice for U.S. House. Look at this. CNN poll, +2 Republican. Wall Street Journal poll, +3 Republican. Monmouth University poll, +3 Republican. Yeah, Joe Biden may be in slightly worse shape in these particular polls, but the fact is, when Biden's down 4, 5, 6 points in these polls, you can only run so far ahead of Joe Biden at this particular point, at least in the race for the House. It does seem like Republicans are ahead because Donald Trump is so far ahead. What's the Senate landscape? I mean, take a look here. GOP needs just a gain of 1 for control if Trump wins, and their path is extremely clear because their best chance for a pickup opportunity is in West Virginia. That's a very likely GOP win with Joe Manchin retiring. If Donald Trump wins this election, the race race for the Senate, for all intents and purposes in my mind, is over.
So here's the thing, Glenn. They've been saying, let's see how he does at this presser he's going to have yesterday or tomorrow in connection with NATO. Let's see how he does with the NATO leaders. And let's see how he does with Stephanopoulos. That's all a head fake. They needed to buy time to see the polls, which were delayed thanks to the July 4th holiday. The polls are coming in. And no matter what happens at tomorrow's presser or with NATO, they're going to say, he just didn't convince us that he can make the case against Trump. That's what's going to happen. What do you think?
Yeah, I just want to underscore the point that you referred to when you mentioned Alan Dershowitz about the difference between age and cognitive inability. I actually debated Alan Dershowitz, I don't know, a month ago or so, 6 weeks ago or so in New York. He's 85 years old. He had spent the entire day at the courthouse covering the Donald Trump trial. And then he came that night to debate me. You know, he wasn't like sleeping. He wasn't in bed. And I had debated him 10 years earlier when he was 75. And other than the fact that it took him a little bit more time to go up the stairs, there was no difference in terms of Alan Dershowitz today and Alan Dershowitz 10 years ago, even though he's much older than than Biden. He's obviously very cognitively alert, as much as he ever was. Trump's not that much younger than Biden, but people don't have these concerns about Trump. And I think this is what I really think is going on, Megyn, is that the issue is not just that people look at Joe Biden and they will never unsee what they saw in the debate, what they've actually been seeing for many years. Only the media is surprised. Americans have known this for many years. I think they see that the Democratic Party, their allies.
Yeah, the American people overwhelmingly thought that Joe Biden was way too old and too frail and too infirm and too senile to be president of the United States, let alone to run for a second term. And years late, 4 years late, the news media are catching up to the perspective of a majority of those surveyed in America.
And the media have been lying and concealing and covering up this issue for so long. And I think that's another reason why it's reflecting poorly on the down ballot Democratic candidates as well. It just has a stench of like a cover up in a way that's very dangerous and deceitful to lie to the public for so many years about the person who has the nuclear codes and what their mental state is. And I think that is part of, it has like a stench of not just concerns about Biden, but a stench of scandal around the Democratic Party, his allies, and the media as well.
Steve Bannon was on the program the day after the debate, and he said there is no way they're going to lose the House and the Senate without a.
Okay, let's play Joe Biden here.
Come back and break this down, and I'll tell you why this is so telling and also disastrous.
We must take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. That's number one. There's a consensus on that. Unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because they literally, I yield myself 3 more minutes, because they literally have not been socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity. We should focus on them now. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets that society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean because we created them that we somehow forgive them or do not take them out of society to protect my family and yours from them. They are beyond the pale, many of those people. Beyond the pale. And it's a sad commentary on society. We have no choice but to take them out of society. And the truth is, we don't very well know how to rehabilitate them at that point. That's the sad truth. I'm the guy that said, rehabilitation, when it occurs, we don't understand it and notice it. And even when we notice it and we know it occurs, we don't know why. So you cannot make rehabilitation a condition for release. That's why in our system, there's the federal system, you serve 85% of your time. It's a shame, but we don't know how to rehabilitate. But there is a consensus, and I will cease. A, we must make the streets safer. I don't care why someone is a malefactor in society. I don't care why someone is antisocial. I don't care why they've become a sociopath. We have an obligation to cordoned them off from the rest of society, tried to help them, tried to change their behavior. That's why we do in this bill. We have drug treatment and we have other treatments to try to deal with it. But they are in jail, away from my mother, your husband, our families. But we would be absolutely stupid as a society if we didn't recognize the condition that nurtured those folks still exist. And we must deal with that.
So Joe Biden doesn't really believe in anything. I mean, he says the exact opposite sentiments when he needed to, right? So Joe Biden has been in politics for 50 years, but he doesn't stand for anything higher than Joe Biden.
Who's a high-powered Democratic donor who speaks to people at the highest levels, because I just needed to talk to someone. And I wanted to share, without revealing any proper nouns, I just wanted to share the notes that I took, what this person had to say to me that brought me up to speed. And you're right there with it. But this person said to me that the nominee can't and won't be President Biden. He's been, I just gave away the pronoun. This person has been in this conversation since before June 27th. So this precedes the debate that this conversation has been going on. This person has been engaged in these conversations since before then. I pitched what I've been calling the CATS plan, which
the P is capitalized in CATS plan. That's how good a plan it is.
I've brought up some of it in our conversations. I believe that the president should step aside in between conventions. So Donald Trump spends the entire convention week bashing the wrong person. Change horses in between conventions. I think he should endorse. He would endorse the vice president, who would then name Gretchen Whitmer as his VP. As you know, I'm an advocate of an all-female ticket. I think it's a game changer as far as the fundamentals of the race and how people.
Okay. Fair enough.
Fight. There's just no chance if they think they eject him and they can save the House and the Senate that they won't eject him. And I realize he controls the delegates and all that, but there are ways of ejecting him. There are ways of having senior party leaders. Barack, I'll forget Pelosi and Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. We're talking like Barack and Michelle and Bill and Hillary go and see him. And it could be something as dramatic as we've got a press conference scheduled for 1 o'clock. It's noon right now that we're meeting with you. One of us is going out there. Either you or we are going to those microphones at 1 and making a statement about the future of this race. It's up to you. But his hand could be forced. Nate Silver, polling god at 538, has been making the case for him to step down for a long time, especially post-debate, though, and was saying he's been mentioning that there's this in good conscience like clause of the promised delegates, which says they have to vote for Joe Biden unless in good.
Yeah, I mean, would you risk your country, your party, your national security over some fine print? Right? What's more important? Survival, flourishing, safety, or the fine print and precedent and bylaws? Right? Being a Democrat doesn't have to be a suicide pact. Choosing to run with Joe Biden is a suicide pact for the Democratic Party. I don't believe that the Democrats are that suicidal.
Conscience, they cannot. And so they could make an argument that they no longer can. There's been a catastrophic event from the time they pledged to support him that must now change. Anyway, the point is the Democrats are not without a hand to play. And I do.
Right. You see with people with lower self-esteem, like a lower sense of efficacy, very quick to give up. I remember people that I talked to on this show, anytime there was any news, it was always an opportunity to feel more gloomy, more depressed. This is why it's absolutely hopeless, right? Some people are so wired into feeling depressed, but people who are effective in life have a sense of their ability to be effective, to change things, and to not just be a prisoner of the fine print and of precedent. And the people who run the Democratic Party are highly effective people.
I believe the wait this week is just to see if they should play it, if they'd somehow gotten lucky and dodged this bullet. And so far the data suggests no, they haven't.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the Democratic Party, for all of their rhetoric about how they and they alone believe in the values of democracy and they are our only safeguard between tyranny and democracy, have repeatedly proven, not just in this election, but prior ones, that they actually run the party in an extremely authoritarian and anti-democratic.
Yeah, this is Glenn Greenwald, a man of the left with some very sharp and valid criticisms of the Democratic Party and how they've rigged the primary elections the last 3 times.
Way. In 2016, when Bernie Sanders had a genuine chance to defeat Hillary Clinton, the DNC intervened and cheated to make sure that she won. And that wasn't me saying that. That was Donna Brazile and Liz Warren and a bunch of emails. That they cheated. They subverted the democracy. Yes. I mean, they absolutely did. And party insiders say it. It's undisputable that that happened. Bernie probably would have won absent that constant cheating. In 2020, not something as great, but something very similar. And they're now mentioning this as Joe Biden rants and raves against the Democratic elites. A lot of these people are going on TV and saying, hey, in 2020, you didn't hate the Democratic elites because we were the ones behind the scenes who forced everyone out of the race so that none of the vote got divided and you could easily beat Bernie. We, the Democratic elites, are the ones who enabled you to win. So they constantly talk about how they manipulate the politics. They manipulate the elections to get the outcomes that they want. Of course, the Democrats, especially if they believe they won't just lose the White House, but the House and the Senate, meaning their own jobs, are going to go to extreme lengths to force Joe Biden out if he chooses to stay in and doesn't leave voluntarily. They have a lot of weapons, including very anti-democratic ones that they've proven before. They're more than happy.
Yeah, a lot of people think that they're irreplaceable, right? At the company you work at, right, in this volunteer position or in this church or this synagogue, but nobody is irreplaceable. And Joe Biden certainly is not. And he's going to get his comeuppance.
Happy to use to get the outcome they want.
James Carville has been a voice of reason throughout this whole contest. He's one of these, he's of course a lifelong Democrat. He's not a woke Democrat, and he's seen what's happened to his party. He's not one of those Democrats who's meandering closer to becoming an independent or Republican. He's a true blue Dem, but he's very critical of what his party has been doing. And in particular, he's been critical lately of their decision not to sub out this obviously infirm man. Here he was reacting to the Cook political report in SOP 2.
Cook moved 6 states away from Democrats. I watch some of these press conferences. It reminds me of a book they made me read in college called Ship of Fools. A bunch of desperate people sailing into disaster. I still think I'll stand by my thing that he won't run, but if he does, we're just making a idiotic choice for the future of our country. And I can't help but believe that. And the proof's in the pudding. They're moving states away from us. We're losing. We're not winning. And when we lose, America loses. It's that simple.
All right, one more for you, Glenn. Who got Bill Clinton elected? That man right there, James Carville, and George Stephanopoulos. They weren't the only two, but they were two important members of the team.
Okay, let's get a quick burst here from Sean Hannity. Yeah, the cover-up of Joe Biden's senility is probably the biggest story here.
For all to see, the current president of the United States is now running for re-election. He's not fit to serve. Everyone on earth knows this and has known for years that Joe Biden is mentally inept, with the exception maybe of Joe Biden himself, who refuses to step aside. Now, after years of covering up all of this, the flat out lying to the American people and maybe to themselves, top Democrats, celebrities in Hollywood, all the elites, prominent left-wing pundits are coming out of the woodwork to beg their clueless president to drop out of the race. Just weeks before the Democratic National Convention, even Georgie Stephanopoulos, David Axelrod, Michael Moore, the editorial board at the New York Times, the numerous Democratic lawmakers, there's actually 8 of them, have openly doubted Joe's ability to beat Trump or even fulfill the basic duties of his job. Chuck Todd now admitting the White House insiders were telling him about Biden's struggles 2 years ago. Chuck, you never thought you should report that? Which is why he's part of the cognitive cover-up and lie cabal. And meanwhile, today, Biden's close ally, Nancy Pelosi, she flat out refused to throw her support fully behind Biden, instead ominously urging the president to think about his options this week because time is running short. He already thought about it. He said he's staying in. Now, according to Axios, even Chuck Schumer is reportedly open to dumping Biden in 2024. And now liberal Hollywood elitist, and frankly, I refer to him as an ignorant jackass, George Clooney, is calling on Joe to withdraw from the race with a dramatic op-ed in the New York Times. He says he knew all of this at that big fundraiser weeks ago, but of course refused to tell you and the American people the truth. Another liar that's part of the cover-up. Now, keep in mind, George Clooney isn't just any far-left actor. He's one of Obama's dear and good friends. This op-ed doesn't happen without Obama's approval. And still, it's important to note that George Clooney and Chuck Todd and Barack Obama, they don't get to just override the will of the people. Democracy is on the ballot this year, right? The democracy
They would have
matters.
bounced him
Every
from office
vote
years ago,
counts,
but they
right?
can't because
That's what
she's
we're
got to be
told, according to
their second
liberals.
choice. She has no choice. And no chance. You know, they are all co-conspirators in the sinister plot to defraud the American public about the cognitive abilities of the man in the Oval Office. Sometimes he says, not there often. Laughing Kamala, Laffin apostrophe. Laughing.
Laughing. Which is based, don't think we didn't do our homework, Glenn, on moments like this. gosh, it's not just the laugh itself, it's that it comes up at the weirdest, most inopportune, inappropriate times. And yeah, so what do you think of laughing, Laffin apostrophe Kamala and Trump's back of the hand order?
Well, first of all, you see Trump there, and for any member of the media or the Democratic partisans or whatever who are like, why aren't people questioning Biden, Trump's capacity to serve? It's because you just look at him in these rallies, like all of that was very funny. Like the comic timing was very perfect. That's a difficult thing to do. Like Biden's in the Oval Office, well, maybe like some of the time he is, and like the whole thing about the brilliance of choosing Kamala Harris, so he can't get pushed aside, and then this nickname for Kamala Harris. The problem with Kamala Harris is cackling like that is that it isn't even like she's laughing at other people's jokes or whatever. She does that when she makes what she thinks is a joke, and like nobody else laughs, and then she spends so much time like cackling, demanding that you laugh along with her at her own joke. I've had people like that in my life. I've seen people do that before. It's so off-putting, and like you're like resentful about it that they're like almost demanding that you laugh at their joke. It's so alienating. And also, yeah, like it's not like she's laughing at other people. She's like, look at how funny I am, and it's like nothing you just said is like remotely humorous. And like again, like also she like has this posture. I always feel like she just walked out of a board of directors meeting of like Aetna or like Pfizer or Boeing or something. She has like very corporate posture. And every time she tries to like adopt a sort of like more like common person vernacular, it just comes off so fake. It's like when AOC,
so when she's been swearing lately.
Yeah, or like just AOC offensively uses like black parlance. I guess she thinks she's earned that. The way Hillary Clinton used to like use that fake Southern accent. These things are just important. Like and also I think the other important part is that every politician has negative things in their background, and because Kamala has never really run for major office on a national level. She ran for vice president, but it doesn't get that scrutiny. There's a huge amount of negative oppo research on her that has never seen the light of day that the Republicans now have tens and hundreds of millions of dollars to pour out. And I think the fact that she is sort of already behind Trump before there's even been any opposition research against her, I don't know. I think the Democrats are so desperate that they're again living in a fairy tale world where they think that either they can just brush her aside and none of their base is going to mind, given all the things they've been told about black women and privilege.
Okay, that's going to do it for me. I want to watch that Uruguay versus Colombia soccer match.